Tonight is December 18th, 2023. This is the 46th episode and 8th episode of Season 3 of the Sports Daily College Basketball Podcast. I'm your host, Sean Vowells, and as usual, I'm joined by Mike Koomar. Tonight, Mike and I will go over what was a pretty awesome Saturday in college hoops. We're going to go over a bunch of games, so they might be a little rapid fire, but we do want to get to all of them. So first, Mike, take it away. Who was your team of the weekend?
Sean, there were a few good ones that we could have picked from. Michigan State had a statement win, which we'll be talking about in a little bit, as did UConn. Memphis, also a big win. They're back in the rankings. But my team of the week, it's the new number one team in the country, Sean, and that is the Purdue Boilermakers. They showed up on Saturday against an Arizona team that's just looked fantastic. The old number one team in the country. And they kind of dominated this game from start to finish. They got out to a nice 11-point lead early on and then really just maintained that throughout the second half. Got close at one point, I think around the 10-minute mark. But incredibly solid game by Purdue. Edey looked dominant as always. And right now they are the clear-cut number one team in the country, Sean.
Yeah, Joe Mead and I talked about this a little bit yesterday, Mike. We came to the conclusion that if Purdue plays like this, they are not going to lose. I mean, Arizona is a spectacular team that, maybe didn't have their best game, but they shot 51% from the field. And they really weren't in the game until late.
No, and that's the thing, Sean, is Arizona played a very competitive basketball game. We'll talk about another team, some other circumstances like that, but Arizona played a good game. And if, like you said, Purdue can play like this every game the rest of the year, they're going to have some cough-ups for sure, but that looked like the number one team in the country right there.
Yeah, it was, like you said, Edey had a pretty solid game. He was the third leading scorer on his team. Fletcher Lawyer had 27 and Braden Smith had 26. And the method for Purdue to win games last year and the year before was for one of them to have a good game with Edey. And if you're getting both, and one of them have had good games every game this year, but they get both of them to have good games, I don't think that there's a team that can beat them. And there's definitely a pro-Purdue crowd in Indy there, but still, this game was really impressive, other than the Peacock coverage that sucked. But
it's truly a bummer.
The Boilers are fully deserving of their number one overall seed right now, and definitely a good pick for team of the weekend. But Mike, let's go to the team that beat them. They had a little bit of an interesting week. Northwestern, they do lose to Chicago State, and then they do back it up with a 10-point road victory against DePaul, which is not that impressive, but unfortunate week for the Wildcats.
Yeah, this is my upset of the week, Sean. Chicago State's, I'm pretty sure they're a quad 14. That's a pretty horrendous loss, and they followed it up. Chicago State did with going against Valparaiso, but that's not saying much. They're 5-9 this year. Northwestern's looked pretty solid this year, except for this game. Didn't watch the game on Saturday. Didn't really see what happened, but that's a huge roadblock in their quest to make another NCAA tournament. And especially with it almost seemed like this game confirmed the lack of depth in the Big Ten. And it could have just been a one-off game, but this is definitely not the Big Ten's year, despite how phenomenal Purdue is. Raise a lot of questions for Northwestern going forward into conference play.
Yeah, I forgot to ask this, or Joe asked this to me yesterday. Like, if you're Northwestern, would you rather have the Purdue win and the Chicago State loss, or would you rather flip those results? I think it's a tough
I think
question.
I'd rather flip those results. That quad one, and we'll see how it plays out with Purdue this year. If Purdue does run the table and loses like one or two more games the rest of the year, you might take what they have right now. But with this ugly quad 4 loss to Chicago State, man, I think I'd rather have the loss to Purdue and a win against Chicago State. I don't know.
Yeah, I said I think I would think about it because Purdue is kind of the only good opportunity for a really good win right now in the Big Ten.
Yeah, that is true.
But I said at this point I think I would take those results, but if you get Wisconsin, you beat Illinois, then I think you would rather switch those. But Northwestern, tough week for them. But why don't we go to another Big Ten team here, Mike, because then I have a question to ask you after we talk about this game. This was the first tip of the day at noon. Kansas stealing one at Assembly Hall, 75-71. impressive atmosphere for the Hoosiers, impressive performance, but ultimately they take the L.
Yeah, and Indiana had a really good, a nice lead, 8-point lead to start the first half of this game. And I will say, to be clear, in the first half of this game, Kansas did not play a bad half of basketball. Indiana was playing out of their minds. The crowd was into it. It seems like the Hoosier special always comes out this time in December, and they can pull off an upset around this time of year. And I just would give a credit to Kansas for being just a really resilient team, because Indiana played as far as a complete basketball game as I think we might see them play this year. Not to say that they're a bad team. They took Kansas to the last 4 minutes of this game, and Kansas just kind of they kept chipping away. It got to, I think, a 15-point lead for Indiana with 15 minutes to go in this game, and Kansas just started to chip away, and then they got that 63 lead, and they just never looked back. That dagger through that they had with KJ Adams with 3.5 minutes to go really just sealed the deal for Kansas, and they took it on from there. But an impressive game for Indiana. They kind of needed that win to be a signature win for the year.
Yeah, we'll go to Kansas first, Mike. They basically have 4 players, and that's pretty much been known. Now, Marco Jackson is limited in what he can do.
Yeah.
They showed up. I think they definitely finished the game well, but they definitely showed that it was their first true road game early on in this one. A couple uncharacteristic turnovers, a couple of missed shots that they probably make, but this is now 2 times where they have come back from double digits in the second half to a pretty decent team. They did it to Kentucky. They don't launch threes either, and they came back from 15 against Kentucky and 13 here, something like that. All of their flaws don't seem to be really mattering. They've got the best in-game coach in the game, and McCullough finishes 3 of 11, Dickinson finishes 8 of 17, but when it comes down the stretch, those guys really delivered for Kansas. And
yeah, I mean, this team shot 6 of 18 from 3-point range. Indiana, they're not really a very good 3-point shooting team. They were making all of their shots early. I think they were 5 of 9 in the first half. They were on fire. And this is a team that typically shoots 26%. So, I mean, part of this was just Indiana had such a great first half of basketball. But kudos to Kansas. Like you said, they have probably the best in-game coach in college basketball in Bill Self. They've got veteran players, even Hunter Dickinson, first year on the team, but he's got so much experience playing at such a high level. He just seems to have such great composure. Sean, I think this is above and beyond the best team in the Big 12 right now. I think the only team that really comes close is Houston. But this is a really, really good basketball team.
Yeah, and like Kansas did end up only making 6 threes, but 4 of them were in the fourth quarter of the game, which was big time.
True.
Jawari McDowell hit a big one. McCullough hit a couple big ones. So they made shots when it mattered. And this is the sort of performance where you are getting a really good performance from a team on the road, or a home team that has a great atmosphere, and you still win. There's a lot of ways Kansas can win a game. If things aren't going their way early on, don't count them out. Even though they might not have like a 20-0 run in them, they certainly have a 31-10 run over 10 minutes in them, which I think is 31-12 or 28-12, something like that. But Indiana, you had a great performance, best of the year. Obviously, their home atmosphere will be terrific for every big game. I think this performance certainly showed that there's enough there to make the NCAA tournament if things go your way. And I think the matchups defensively are better against power conference teams than mid-majors with 4 guards. But, Xavier Johnson will be back sometime soon. They think that they will get him back before the Big Ten rolls back around. But I'll ask you this, Mike. We've had a pretty solid top 3 in the Big Ten so far, being Purdue, Illinois, and Wisconsin. Is there any other team in the Big Ten that's definitely better than this Indiana team?
It's better. I don't think so, Sean. I think it's those big 3. Illinois looked really, really good so far this year, and I would like to highlight them later on in the show. But even in their losses, Illinois had flashes of brilliance. This is a really good basketball team. Purdue is Purdue. I think you could have made a case for Northwestern before you had this really head-scratching loss against Chicago State. The rest of the conference, I mean, you've got some decent teams. Ohio State's got a good start to the year. They've got that head-scratching loss against Penn State. I think Rutgers has the capability to be a really good team, but I don't think this is their year. We saw how badly that they lost to Illinois earlier at home. Usually they're a strong home team, and then they had that loss to Wake Forest, so it's pretty convincing. So, yeah, Sean, I don't know. I will say, and we're going to get to Michigan State in a little bit. Michigan State, if they play like they did this past Saturday, they could be that other team. That could be the fourth best team in the Big Ten. They could even be the third or the second best.
Yeah,
that performance was incredible.
Yeah, I think if you're Indiana, obviously 7-3 is probably where you thought you'd be at this point. You're playing two top 5 teams and then an Auburn team that, by some measures, not in the top 25 this week. That's pretty ridiculous because their 2 losses are to a road game to Appalachian State, who is a top 100 team, and to Baylor, who is really good, barring this Saturday's performance. So obviously the margins should have been better for Indiana. You didn't crush anybody really, and you kind of got blown out in 2 or 3 losses, but I think this team's fit for the Big Ten, at least to come in the top half.
And I think you look at their first 4 games in the conference. They've got three easy games to finish off the out-of-conference schedule: Morehead State, North Alabama, Kennesaw State. Kennesaw State's a pretty good team, but I don't think Indiana will struggle in any of those games. You get into the Big Ten play, and of the first 4 games, really your tough game is at Rutgers, and then you're hosting Ohio State. Other than that, against Minnesota and against Nebraska, Nebraska has been improved this year, but I still like Indiana to take those first 4 games before ahead of that Purdue matchup, and that is going to be a rocking crowd in Bloomington, John.
Yeah, Joe and I were talking yesterday, Mike. Is Purdue the only other team in the country that wins that game on Saturday against Indiana? I think so. I don't think any other team, with Trey Galloway scoring 28, I don't think any other team other than Kansas and Purdue finds a way to win that game. But at the end of the day, it is what it is. Yeah. But you're already 2-0 in the Big Ten, and you got some easy games early on, which we talked about earlier in the season being a positive, but you need some big wins, so that Purdue game becomes a lot bigger. But next one, Mike, you talked about it earlier. Your Baylor Bears were on the wrong end of a desperate Michigan State Izzo effort. The Spartans won 88-64. Baylor's had a pretty good start to the season. It is their first loss. I think we can just write this one off as a bad performance for the Bears.
Yeah, I mean, this was an embarrassing performance for Baylor. This is, since I've been covering Baylor since the 2017-28 season, probably that first half was probably one of the worst 3 halves of basketball I've seen Baylor play. And part of that was forcing the ball, taking way too many dribbles, shooting ridiculous 3-point attempts that they weren't going to go in. But I don't want to take credit away from Michigan State and how well they played. I mean, they shot the daylights out of the basketball. I think they shot 62% from 3-point range in that game. They made every bucket. They out-hustled Baylor. They played better on defense. They out-rebounded Baylor. They looked like a really, really good basketball game. And I was catching the game earlier when they took out Oakland. Surprised that they did not play as well as they did against Baylor on Saturday. But they still played phenomenally. They dominated Oakland, got a nice 17-point win out of that one. This might be the turning point for Michigan State this season, Sean. If they can continue to play like that, there is no reason that they don't win 13 games in the Big Ten.
Yeah, they needed this one, and now it becomes a whole lot easier for a path to them to the tournament.
They can take a breath.
They will not have an offensive performance like this again, probably. You had a great day at the office shooting the ball, but I think they can play that well defensively. Like that's a thing that Joe Meade and I have been calling for Michigan State, to just emphasize defense. And if you make shots, you'll win by a lot, and if you don't, you'll be in the game. And that seems like Michigan State's best way back is to kind of be like Iowa State.
Izzo was getting interviewed before the game, and they said, what do you guys need to do to be successful again and to turn the title this season? And what did he say? Is we needed to out rebound our opponents, and we need to start playing defense. They did both of those, and if you can make your shots, it's a wrap. This could be a top 20 team in the next 4 to 5 weeks.
Yeah, so Michigan State desperately needed that. They get the job done. Next one, Mike, here we mentioned it before we went live. I didn't catch much of this game, but Houston gets the job done at a neutral site in Houston against Texas A&M. They improved to 11-0 on the season. A balanced attack from the Cougars with 4 of their 5 starters double digits. Emmanuel Sharp leading the way with 21. Texas A&M, you got a pretty legacy performance from Wade Taylor IV with 34 points, but the Cougars are undefeated at 11-0.
Yeah, this is just a really good Houston team. I think this is one of those where, similar to when we were talking about with the Indiana-Kansas game, I think Texas A&M played about as well as they could play. They got on a neutral court, and people say, yes, in Houston. Texas A&M has got a huge draw coming out of Houston. That game, I was catching some highlights. That was about a neutral crowd as it gets. 12,000 people there, good attendance. They played phenomenal basketball, and that team will likely make the tournament. Now, they did have an injury in that game to one of their role players, so we'll see how that goes the rest of the year. Arashino tore his Achilles. He only played 6 minutes in this game. So I think that they'll be fine, especially with the guard play for Houston. My biggest concern for Houston this year is the lack of depth. They've really now, with that injury, they've only got 7 players that they can really play on a consistent basis. And given those guards are phenomenal with LJ Cryer, you got Sharp and Sheep, but is that going to be enough if a couple of those guys get into foul trouble in the NCAA tournament? I don't know.
It's a big deal that they could probably roll with that if they were still in the American Conference, because you'd have 4 of every 5 games being over by the midway point in the second half. But that's not going to be the case in the Big 12. So I think that is definitely something to look out for the Cougars, as the Big 12 comes pretty thick and fast here. But they get the job done. They haven't lost yet. Texas A&M had a lot of promise coming into the year. They've lost a couple games in their MTEs. Wade Taylor's awesome, and then they were down one of their good players, Tyrese Radford, too. So Texas A&M definitely not a great year for the SEC so far, but they definitely still should make the tournament. Next game, Mike, we talked about this not being on TV last time on ESPN+. It was previously undefeated Clemson losing at the Forum to Memphis 79-77. Memphis is putting together a pretty good start to the season.
Yeah, first, what a crying shame that this game wasn't on national TV, because this is one of the best games of the entire weekend. One of the best games, I would say, of conference play in the entirety of college basketball this year. Clemson came out hot. They shot the basketball phenomenally, and they got up to a nice 12-point lead going into halftime. But almost immediately, Memphis cut into that lead, and that lead was next to nothing by that 4-minute TV timeout in the first half, or the second half, excuse me. So we played the last 15, 16 minutes of this game where it was just back and forth. And in the end, Memphis gets the job done. They have really pieced together an impressive out-of-conference schedule. They kind of need it because the American Conference is very weak this year. But they look really good. I think they're 23rd in the country now. They moved into the rankings, and they definitely earned this one. They were the best team on the court on Saturday with that second-half performance. That was phenomenal, Sean.
Yeah, I don't think Clemson played their best, but they certainly put together at least an okay effort in this one. And, you shot 49% from the field. That's probably going to be enough 75% of the time in the ACC. But like you said, Memphis has had a great schedule this year. Props to Penny Hardaway and the AD there. They've won at Missouri already. They've beaten Arkansas and Memphis and Michigan in the battle for Atlantis. A tough loss to Villanova in the championship. A tough loss at an undefeated Ole Miss. You win at VCU. You win at Texas A&M. Now you win at home to Clemson. Those are plenty of good wins. Now, obviously not a win against a top 5 team yet, but you've probably got 5 or 6 wins against teams that at least have a shot to make the tournament so far, and that is probably better than anybody else in the country.
Yeah.
And
And keep in mind, Sean, Memphis is going to get Naquan Tomlin back in the new year. They're not going to get him for the remaining games here in the conference season. They've got a good game that we're going to be talking about coming up, but that's going to be another great addition for this team going into the NCAA tournament, a guy that they can get into the swing of things before then.
yeah, the American Conference did lose Houston, but they do pick up FAU, so it's kind of going to be more the same
Yeah.
in the American. I think two teams are going to make it unless somebody else wins the conference tournament at this point. But Memphis has probably already done enough to warrant an at-large bid even without an FAU win, which is pretty hard to do.
Yeah.
And they've got another chance
Yeah.
on Tuesday that we'll talk about later. But Mike, I've got a couple more here. We've got the CBS Sports Classic, Game 1. Ohio State knocks off UCLA. Ohio State definitely aiming for a top half finish in the Big Ten after a poor season last year. UCLA's not great, but the Buckeyes get the job done.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to ask you, Sean, if you thought Ohio State was back. I mean, they have had that one tough loss to Penn State that I mentioned earlier this year, and they're a team that could potentially replace Indiana as a top 4 team. I don't see it right now, but with that being said, it is a big win for Ohio State. This program needed a win, especially at a conference with how abysmal last season was for them. They had a huge letdown season, so this is a really nice win for them.
Yeah, I think we're starting to see a definite top 6 in the Big Ten, and that would be the top 3 that we mentioned, Michigan State, Ohio State, and Indiana, as of now.
Yeah.
Ohio State did get Alabama. Turns out Bama's probably not as good as people thought. They do lose that Penn State game, like you said, but the UCLA team in the Pac-12, should be near the top of the standings there. I think they're still figuring out their rotations. They do have a pretty solid 9-man rotation, but they're still figuring out where Jamison Battle's best suited. Said T and Akpara basically swapping at the 5. They're not on the floor together. But they're definitely a top half Big Ten team, and at this point, probably better than 50% chance to make the big dance. Although you would have said that last year at this time too. The other CBS Sports Classic game, Mike, was a really good one between UNC and Kentucky. The Wildcats get the job done, 87-83. Pretty balanced attack from the Wildcats, 4 players in double digits. Rob Dillingham leading the way with 17, and then R.J. Davis, 27 for the Tar Heels. This was a good game. Not really sure you can lower your expectations for North Carolina, but definitely thinking better about the Wildcats.
Oh, yeah. This was a big win for Kentucky, and they had a couple of questionable performances earlier this year. Kentucky, I will say, they had a 12-point lead in this game with about 15 minutes to go. And UNC brought that lead back and made this really tight going down the stretch. But kudos to this Kentucky team. They've, like you said, had a really questionable loss to UNC Wilmington. They didn't look good against UPenn. They've been kind of shaky at times this year, Sean, but this was a big statement win for the Wildcats. And for UNC, personally, I thought they were kind of overrated going to this game. We'll see more about them on Wednesday when they take on Oklahoma. I'm sure we'll talk about that game in a little bit, but still a really hard-fought game for the Tar Heels. And I think this is more of a testament to how good Kentucky might actually be this year.
Yeah, and Mike, I've only got one more game here. If you want to talk about any more after, then please remind me. But Friday night, UConn goes into Seattle and pretty much crushes Gonzaga. They end up winning by 13, but this game was not really a game after halftime. Donovan Clingan, 21 and 8. You get 3 solid players off the bench for UConn. Gonzaga, Anton Watson gives you 20. Obviously impressed with UConn in this one, but Gonzaga, probably a down year for the Bulldogs.
Yeah, I think any other week later on going into the season that we would consider this UConn game to be the statement win. But since we had 2 other statement wins this week, this fell to the third, but this game was never even close, Sean. This was pretty much a Gonzaga road game in Seattle. 95% of the fans there at a sellout crowd were Gonzaga fans. And this game wasn't close from the get-go. UConn dominated. They looked like a championship team. I know a lot of people in college basketball thought that UConn might lose a step going this year. This game, they proved that they have not lost a step. This is UConn's right up there with Purdue and Kansas, in my opinion, as the top contenders for a national championship this year.
Yeah, UConn. People are talking about, are they the best? Do they have a real good chance of repeating? Have they had the best chance of repeating since Florida? I think Kansas a couple years ago had a great chance of repeating.
Yeah.
Or last year, until Bill Self went down and couldn't coach. But they look like they're as good as last year. They were basically the best team in the country, UConn, for all but like a month where they lost 6 in a row.
Well, they lost. Yeah.
That doesn't seem possible this year. I mean, they've got a lot of good players. They lost their freshman, who's going to be a first-round NBA draft pick for a couple games already. Didn't even notice that he was gone in a good way for UConn. Obviously, he's a great player. You want him to play, but your game did not drop at all when he was sitting on the bench.
No.
Mike, that's all the games that I have. Obviously, it was a packed slate. This week is, a little bit lighter, a lot of bye games, but still there's 1, 2, 3, 4. There's 9 games that I have here that we can pick. Last week I went 5-3. You went 4-4. So still pretty close early on. We are going to start with tomorrow. Virginia visits Memphis. 2 teams that are in the top 25. I'm going to go with the Tigers here. I think that they're better than Virginia. They're at home. I think they'll get the W.
Yeah, I agree, Sean. And a game that we didn't get to talk about was Virginia this past weekend surviving against a Northeastern team that really isn't very good. They're 4-7 this year. So UVA's got a good record, but I don't think they're as good as their ranking shows. I think Memphis is going to win this game pretty easily.
So the next game, Mike, we've got Big East play starting this week. We've got Marquette going to Providence to play the Friars, both teams at 9-2. Marquette obviously ranked 6th in the country, but Providence has been better than okay so far. Marquette is 4.5-point favorites. Do the Friars have a chance in this one?
The Friars have a really good chance in this one. And I've liked what I've seen from Providence. As limited as I've seen them this year, they've looked really good. With that being said, Marquette's 2 losses, 2 really good teams. This Marquette team's battle-tested. They've played on the road already in big games this year. So I'm going to give Marquette the edge here, and I think they're going to pull this game out in the last 4 minutes.
Yeah, I'm going to go with the Friars. I do think that they need kind of a statement win to they've had a good season so far. They beat a Wisconsin team that's actually turning out to be pretty good. And, that atmosphere is pretty good. This will be a good atmosphere. I think you can defend well enough to be in this game, and your crowd can get you across the line. But this is going to be a real good one. Obviously, Marquette is probably as good of a 2-loss resume as you could have. But should be a good one there to start out. Big East play. We're going to go to another Big East game here on Wednesday, Mike. We've got UConn going to the Prudential Center to play the Seton Hall Pirates. Seton Hall did win this game last year. I'm going first for this one. I don't think Seton Hall, even though Seton Hall did beat Missouri yesterday, I think that they had a great game against Missouri. I can't see them shooting like that again. I'm going to go with the Huskies in this one.
Yeah, I mean, whoop-de-doo, they beat Missouri. These UConn team's a whole lot different. I don't think this game is even close. I'm going to go with UConn by 20.
Also at that time on Wednesday, Mike, on ESPN is your Baylor Bears playing Duke at Madison Square Garden. Real good Is this Baylor's next game? I think it is. Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Great opportunity for Baylor to bounce back after kind of laying an egg against Michigan State. Duke 7-3 on the year. Definitely have not been as good as people thought. Who's going to win this one?
Yeah, I actually had a hard time predicting the winner of this game. Scott Drew's teams tend to bounce back really well, especially after embarrassing losses. You look at their embarrassing losses over the years, Baylor always seems to get back in the win column. With that being said, Duke, it's a good Duke team. It does have a little bit of a matchup nightmare for Baylor with Flipkowski, an outstanding center for Duke. It's going to be a predominantly Duke home crowd at MSG. I'm going to go with the Blue Devils in this one.
Interesting. I'm going to go with Baylor. I think that, like you said, bounce back spot. Duke hasn't played in like a week and a half either. They haven't. I think they have more rebounds than their opponent in 2 games this year. I think Baylor can take advantage of that and just be a little bit more physical than them, because when confronted with kind of a dogfight of a game, Duke has kind of not really shown up. So I'm going to go with Baylor. Yeah. ESPN's giving Duke a 59% chance to win. I think it's pretty close to 50-50. I think if Duke can get a decent performance from their guards and have their forwards rebound, I think they will win the ball game. Next game also on Wednesday, 9 o'clock, is a game that probably is turning out to be a lot better of a game than people thought at the beginning of the year. That's Oklahoma and North Carolina playing in the Jumpman Invitational at the Spectrum Center in Charlotte. Another neutral game that will be heavily favored towards one crowd. Oklahoma's ranked 7th in the country, 10-0. I'm going to say that they keep their undefeated season going. Porter Moser is going to carve up that Tar Heel defense. What do you think?
I love it. Sean, I thought you were going to go with the Tar Heels, and that's why I was going to defend Oklahoma in the Big 12, and I don't need to do that. I'm going to keep with Oklahoma. I think they're a fantastic team. They keep dominating opponents, and this will be their toughest test so far, playing in a hostile environment in Charlotte against UNC, but I think the Sooners can get it done.
That'll be a good one. Again, 9 o'clock on Wednesday. We have got two more games on Wednesday that we're going to talk about. Another Big East game at 9 o'clock on Fox Sports 1. That's 9 o'clock Eastern time. We've got Villanova going out to Nebraska to play Creighton. Creighton 9-2 on the year. Villanova 7-4. Villanova has been pretty good against teams outside of the state of Pennsylvania. You giving the Wildcats any chance in this one?
Yeah, Sean, probably the best game of the week that we didn't talk about was Creighton versus Alabama. Creighton squeaked by Alabama, and I do think that Alabama team is better than their record shows. But with that being said, I'm going to go with the upset here. I'm going to go with the Wildcats. I think this is a big win, and they've been really good in big-time game situations. It's been the games that they're supposed to win that they haven't been winning. So I'm going to go with the Wildcats to pull off the upset here in Omaha.
Yeah, I might be misremembering, but did Villanova win this game last year? I think they either did or they competed until the very end.
It was later think they won this game.
It was later.
Let's check real quick, Sean.
I think they did. They either won it or just lost. So I was leaning towards Nova too, but Mike, I'm going to mix it up a little bit here because we've been the same a lot. I think Creighton have bounced back from their kind of embarrassing loss to UNLV. With a good win against a Bama team that can score it as good as anybody. Villanova hasn't played since the 9th, and I don't think that that is their next game, so maybe a little bit of rust there. This is their first true road game of the year. I don't think Penn at the Palestra counts as a true road game. I think Creighton will take this one, but I still like this Nova team. I think there's a lot there. Still, they have some good wins already. They beat a North Carolina team. They beat a good Memphis team. They beat Maryland. They beat UCLA. And 2 of the 3 Big 5 teams that they've lost to are, near 100. So those losses definitely not as bad as, maybe you thought they'd be in the first place. Next game.
Yeah, and Sean.
Go
ahead. Villanova beat Creighton actually twice last year, both times by double digits.
So. Yeah, I do remember that game. I do think the dogfight style definitely favors Nova in this one. Creighton kind of likes offense to be clean and them to be able to run their stuff. I think Nova can get them out of it, at least like a Shaka Smart Texas team. But last game Wednesday, Mike, Alabama against Arizona at the Hall of Fame series at the Footprint Center in Phoenix. Alabama can score it with anybody. Arizona coming off of a loss. Wildcats bounce back in this one?
I do think they will. It's going to be a predominantly Arizona favorite crowd. I like them to get the bounce back. I think Alabama is actually a lot better team than people think. 7-4 on the year, but they've had a lot of really tough losses. They've played a lot of really good competition. But with that being said, the future Big 12 team will get the job done.
Yeah, I have to agree. I think maybe if Alabama, if Alabama, if Arizona had beaten Purdue, maybe you get them kind of like off of a really high win, and you can't replicate that sort of same level of intensity. But after a loss, it's just really hard to beat a good team because they'll be more focused. They'll be, more than already. But Alabama, they're kind of staring their fifth loss in the face here. They've lost to an Ohio State team that's at least a tournament team as of now, a Clemson team that we've given a lot of praise to, a Purdue team that's elite, and a Creighton team that's really good. And they've hung with the last two. They've hung with Purdue and they hung with Creighton. So if you hang in this one, they can score it enough to pull it off. I wouldn't, not going to rule them out of making this a game. I'm just going to lean towards Arizona because, Arizona was talked about as the true number one team in the country, and I don't think they want to drop two in a row.
Yeah.
Next one here, Mike, this may also be Wednesday. Let me check real quick. This is between Michigan and Florida. This is actually tomorrow, 7 o'clock at the Spectrum Center in Charlotte, North Carolina. Florida, Michigan. Not really sure who the crowd is going to favor. Both teams have been okay to start the year. Michigan has been very up and down. Florida's just kind of been, they have hung with some good teams and they haven't blown out some bad teams. This is a truly, I think, a coin flip.
Yeah, it really is. And Juwan Howard's going to be back coaching Michigan again. So blessing to see him back on the sidelines. With that being said, I think Florida gets a job done. They've played some good basketball. They took a good Baylor team all the way to the end. And what was a really competitive game there. Their losses right now, UVA, Wake Forest, which not a great one. But with that being said, I think Florida's going to get the job done here.
I think Michigan is playing better. They have played great and really bad and great already, and it's only December 18th. I'm hoping they keep it going. They look pretty good against Iowa on the road, and then they beat a Eastern Michigan team at home. I'm going to give the Wolverines the edge here. We went through a little bit of the matchups yesterday on the In a Nutshell podcast, and I do think that Michigan can cause some matchup problems for Todd Golden in Florida. Just they're a very big team. They're a little bit on the slower side, and Doug McDaniel is the fastest player in the country without a question at this point. So I'm going to give the Wolverines the edge, but this really could go either way because we've seen Florida be pretty even-keeled and okay.
Yeah.
And Michigan could win this game by 17 or lose by 20. I mean, it really could be either one. Last game that we're going to pick here, Mike, is Friday. It is the bragging rights game between Illinois and Missouri. This is at Missouri, I think. Yes, it is at Missouri.
It's going to be in St. Louis.
Oh, St. Louis. Okay, so...
Yeah, neutral site.
Neutral site. Should be close to 50-50. You've got the number 13 ranked Fighting Illini at 8-2 against a Missouri team at 7-4. Has already lost two of their big non-conference home games against Seton Hall and Memphis. They are yet to have a big win. They hung at Fog Allen with Kansas, but they ultimately lose by 9. I'm not giving the Tigers any chance here. I think Illinois takes care of business and picks up a nice non-conference win.
Yeah, Illinois has struggled in the bragging rights game for years. Even when they've been a significantly better team than Missouri, they seem to struggle in this game. But I think those struggles dissipate, and I think that they get a nice win, finally beating their rival. They haven't done it in a couple of years, but I think the Illini are going to roll in St. Louis, take down Missouri.
And the Tigers are on a 2-game losing streak. Don't really want to make it 3 if you want to make the NCAA tournament.
Yeah.
Good chance to turn your fortunes around here. They do have Central Arkansas before SEC play starts. And really, other than Kentucky and Ole Miss, it's down SEC. And Tennessee, it looks like it might be a down SEC. But we can talk about that before the conference season starts. Not sure when we'll be on next. If possible, I think it'd be nice if we did a conference reset and redid our power rankings and changed them from the beginning of the year because at least in the Big 12, Mike,
Yeah.
there's going to be a pretty big change for one team from Utah.
Oh yeah, a couple teams. Yeah.
We went over the good games this week. After Friday, there really isn't much until after New Year's, so maybe we'll have some filler episodes in there or something like that. So, Mike, anything you want to add before we wrap it up?
No, this is going to be, the last big week of college basketball before we hit the new year. A couple good games this week, and then we'll be hitting the conference season hard. Shout out to the Baylor Bears. They've got their last game at the Farrell Center. They've played there for about 40 years now. I'll be there on Friday to cheer on the Bears as they play a pretty bad Mississippi Valley State. But the end of an era there in Waco, Texas, as they get into a new arena at the start of the 2024 calendar year.
So thank you for everyone for tuning in. Be sure to check out our other podcasts and our posts on Instagram. And we'll see you next time. Thanks for tuning in.